Hello everyone, I'm David Puente in New York. Today an interview about the private life of perhaps the most controversial leader in the world, Venezuela's Hugo Chavez. One of Latin America's best-known investigative journalists, Olga Wornat, talked to me about the private side of this very outspoken leader. In her book, her latest book, A Cursed Chronicles, Wornat deals with Chavez's mental health, his spending habits, even his love life. Olga Wornat says she spoke to Hugo Chavez and his inner circle, from ex-wives to cabinet members and even his psychiatrist. Here's my conversation with Olga Wornat about Venezuela's president, Hugo Chavez.
Él sí me pareció una persona muy carismática.
He's a very charismatic person, very seductive, like Fidel but younger. I know Hugo Chavez very well. I have studied much about him and have investigated Hugo Chavez. Hugo Chavez is a pragmatist, very sensitive. He likes to touch, physical contact. He looks you in the eyes, even recites poetry to you.
Te dice poesías.
Es simpático.
Muy simpático.
Very simpatico. But at the same time, he's a man that you can talk to him about theology. You can talk to him about politics. He's very well read.
In your book, you say you spoke to his psychiatrist?
Yo hablé con su psiquiatra.
I spoke to his psychiatrist, Dr. Churino. He's the president's psychiatrist in Venezuela. Venezuela is a very colorful country with lots of surrealism. And what could be absurd in another country to speak to the president's psychiatrist? In Venezuela, you actually speak to the president's psychiatrist. He says Hugo Chavez is bipolar. That's what Dr. Churino says. The psychiatrist says he's bipolar. People who are bipolar, if you analyze Chavez's behavior and if you study what being bipolar means, going from euphoria to depression, he sleeps very little, only 3 or 4 hours. There are times he gets very depressed, and when he does, he disappears and no one knows where he has gone.
Not even members in his government?
No one, no one, no one. They say the comandante has disappeared, and he's disappeared. And those are the times of his depression. He's also medicated. He takes Prozac.
He takes Prozac?
He takes Prozac.
How can you know that?
Well, because of his psychiatrist and my sources in his cabinet in Venezuela and through his ex-wives.
When the comandante Hugo Chavez disappears, where do you think he goes?
He could go to a lover's home. The lover who was his lover for over 20 years. Herma Marksman confirmed this as well. She said he is bipolar and was taking medication, and that when he'd have a period of depression, and depressed to the point that he'd stay in bed, and for example, he could suddenly have a high of euphoria, and the following week fall into a deep depression. So he'd go from feeling like a king to feeling like he was in the dark.
Irma Marksman still lives in Venezuela?
Yes, she lives in Venezuela. In the case of Herma, who I think was the great love of Hugo Chavez's life, she shared her life with him, 20 years of her life with him. She told me that she is no longer in love with him, but she even showed me a bunch of letters and poems that he wrote to her, which I thought were a little corny. Well, very corny to tell you the truth.
But very much in love.
Yes.
What did you learn about Hugo Chavez's childhood?
He loved his grandmother. I think she was the person he loved the most, the one person that most influenced his life. And he goes to his grandmother's when he leaves his parents' home. I read the letters that he wrote to Herma, his lover. The letters he wrote, written in his handwriting, where he spoke to her about how he had to forget the abuse of his mother and father, who were still alive.
And they have a relationship with him now.
Oh, of course. He was born in the state of Barinas, and in the state of Barinas, who are the monarchs of the state of Barinas, the family of Hugo Chavez. The father was the governor there twice, and the mother is a tremendous woman, Elena, bad, strong, authoritative, and with him, they punished him a lot when he was a child, so he'd take cover at his grandmother's house.
When you say punish, what do you mean?
Punish him with beatings, taking off the belt and beating him, and he'd escape to his grandmother's who'd protect him from the physical abuse.
Olga, is nepotism a problem in today's Venezuela?
It's very normal to hire family members in Latin America, and you'll see that in Venezuela it's the most common. And don't forget, it's the revolution. No one disputes the comandante. He makes or breaks what he wants. He hires whomever he wants. The eldest daughter, when she married, they threw an incredible party. Incredible. And it's curious, she went to live in Paris. She didn't go to live in Cuba. No, she went to Paris. But that's not the most serious of Hugo Chavez. What is happening in Venezuela is much worse than that. The dictatorship, the absence of liberty of expression, the corruption. The family of Hugo Chavez, who are the richest of Venezuela. They live like kings. They don't live like the poor in poor neighborhoods.
But Olga, you don't think that's the most serious?
Chavez is a dangerous man. He is the head of state who can make a decision in a state of euphoria or in a state of terrible depression. So suddenly he can invite the Ayatollahs of Iran or the president of Iran and invite them to Venezuela to challenge Bush. And I think those attitudes that he has can be even more dangerous than whether he has his brother or family in government.
Who is the person that can influence Hugo Chavez?
Fidel. Fidel is the only one. Fidel is like his dad. Fidel is the only one who can make him change his opinion if he gets too extreme. Today he thinks he's Fidel's son, the successor. The day when Fidel dies, he'll think he is Fidel, but with money. Lots of money to give away. I spoke to his tailor who makes his suits with Italian fabrics. I spoke to the jewelers. He has a collection of watches. He loves good brand name watches, and he has a collection of watches of all brands.
You speak also of creams, perfumes, clothes?
Yes, he loves them. Collections of ties, collections of suits.
How can you say this with authority? How can Olga Wornat confirm that he spends so much money on clothes?
It's the Venezuelan people paying for all of this. When you find out how much an Armani suit is...
But when has he been seen wearing an Armani suit?
Oh, he wears them.
You speak of an Airbus that he spent $65 million on?
That was a huge scandal.
Does he still have this?
Oh, yes, of course.
And that for $500,000 he changed the flag on the Airbus?
Because he didn't like it. Because he wanted on the plane the flag the way he used to draw it when he was in school as a little boy. And since the painters didn't paint it to look the same, he ordered one night that it be erased and make the flag to look like the one when he was in school as a boy.
His last wife. Did you speak to her?
Yes, I spoke to her. But her relationship with Chavez was a very bad one, very turbulent. She told me that they'd have fights, violent fights, and that Chavez would hit her. When Rosie Ness was born, her mother was breastfeeding her. So what would he do? He'd tell the women of Venezuela to breastfeed. And he'd cheer his wife and say, "Hey, look how my wife breastfeeds." He was even vulgar on TV. When I asked her how she felt when he'd talk about this, she said she felt ashamed. And that when she'd say something to him about it, he'd become very manipulative and stop talking to her or get violent with her.
Olga, what do you think will happen with Hugo Chavez?
What does Chavez do if oil prices fall? How does he maintain power while giving all the neighboring countries money? And giving away fists full of money the way he is now to the poor Venezuelans? What happens when that ends? I think deep inside he'd like to be killed and become a martyr, like the Che, and to be loved by the millions, and to have a marvelous funeral with millions of Venezuelans running alongside the funeral carriage. And he'd become a myth, which is what he'd love.